frightened to death to do this, but I've wrote out my remarks and put them in this folder in great big type because I'm at that awkward age where my arms aren't long enough anymore, and the reading glasses I get at the Dollar Tree are not strong enough, so I've got to do it this way. It's really great to be here today with you. Becky and I are really honored to be selected as the OSA badge honorees for 2026. We've kind of a surprise, I got to tell you, when Connie called me. In fact, I kind of thought it was a joke, a prank, because that kind of goes on around here sometimes. But it sounded like Connie, and
Get closer to the mic.
closer. Okay, she says closer.
Can you hear?
Well, I was just going to make a point about Connie. In fact, I said I'm not sure, Connie, that I'm old enough for this. And she, I could kind of hear. This was on the telephone. I could kind of hear a muffled laugh, and then she comes back and said, "Oh, you're old enough." And there wasn't any room for debate. And as anybody who knows Connie, that was the end of the debate. So. I decided, I did tell her I need to talk to Becky and see if she wants to go along with this, and she said, maybe she said no way at first, but she said as long as she didn't have to speak. And so she is going to sit here, my wife Becky, and I'm going to do all the talking, and I guess she reserves the right to stand up and correct me if I get off track. Obviously, we agreed to do this. I'm not much of a speaker, so I'm going to be reading most of this to hopefully so I don't get off track, which is easy enough to do. Before I get into that, though, I want to confess that I will be referring to my hometown as Lafayette throughout my remarks, and all you historians know that that's not right. As a kid growing up, I thought Lafayette was named for the revolutionary hero, the French general, the Marquis de Lafayette, and I kind of pitied everybody else in town who called it Lafayette. But years later, I learned that the town was platted by William Dunbar, and he named it for his son, Leif. So it turns out I was the ignorant one all those years, and so Lafayette it is going to be, but I may slip into a Lafayette once in a while. Let's talk first about Becky. Becky was born at St. Francis Hospital in Peoria, the daughter of Bill and Maxine Robb. Bill had been a medical corpsman in the Navy and was working at St. Francis at that time, actually assisting in surgeries, and he told me once he actually removed, under supervision, removed someone's appendix, and that person survived the surgery. Anyone who knew Bill can believe that that was probably what happened. Later, Bill took a job with Standard Oil walking the pipeline, the one that surfaces at Laura and crosses the Illinois River at Chillicothe. He was looking for leaks. He was so good at it that they transferred him to Kansas, where the same job, checking for leaks, a little more challenging because of rattlesnakes. Bill didn't like snakes, and he didn't like Kansas either, and so he moved back to Wyoming, where he took a job with Wayne Sauter selling Oliver farm equipment. And he was pretty good at it. That brought Becky to Wyoming. She grew up there with brothers Gary and Dean. Gary still lives in Wyoming after retiring after 41 years at Keystone. And Dean operates a high-end restaurant in Birmingham, Alabama. And high-end is a way of saying very expensive stuff that he sells there. And with names of seeds we can't pronounce. Bill and Maxine grew up near Moberly, Missouri. Their family had arrived in the southern United States before the 1800. They're German, Irish, mainly German and Irish, and some other mixes in there. They grew up down there and favored that little accent. Becky has a little of it herself. Back in Wyoming, Becky enjoyed her innocence growing up there with memories of nearby Sandham School, walking to the Paramount Theater, and nickel dishes of pickles at Lily Beale's Cafe there on the main drag. She was a good little girl, but she wasn't perfect. She would sneak out for the pickles between Sunday school and the service at the Congregational Church, where she sang in the choir and occasionally passed notes to her friend Carol Hermes. No, Bill and Maxine didn't know about the notes or the pickles. During high school, Becky mostly enjoyed singing in an award-winning choral group, but would say when pressed that she was interested in a nursing career. And that ended when she realized nursing sometimes involves flowing blood. Truly, all she ever wanted to be was a mother. She married at age 18 to Wayne Traffigan. There were 3 kids, Renee, Denise, and Chad. Chad and Brooke and the family are back here with us today. Renee is married to Kyle Wallace, and they live in Arkansas. Denise is in Southwest Virginia. Chad, who does pretty well making great big houses out at Oak Run. He's here with Brooke, who is an Osceola girl, and they live in Oak Run. She has been a teacher for many years, a long, long time, more than she probably wants to know. Their son, the youngest, Dawson, is here today. He has got a basketball scholarship to Monmouth College. He's pretty good, they tell me, and we've seen him play. Daughter Delaney is completing a nursing program at Illinois State University. Our grandson Chase is here today with us, with his wife Brittany. He's a cancer survivor and a registered nurse. Brittany, also a cancer survivor, is here, and son Jameson. They live in the house where Ron and Lily Wallace lived for many years on Wallace Highway. How about that? Talk about old settlers. His brother Zachary Wallace is a first sergeant and combat veteran, and he's stationed in Texas at this time. He and Jess have 4 kids, Adeline, Christopher, Austin, and Lowell. Named after me, they tell me. Our oldest granddaughter, Whitney Ollinger, lives in Kewanee with James and sons Caden and Thomas. Her sister Taylor is in Brimfield, actually right now in Florida on some kind of pharmacist convention. But her husband, Kevin Fry, is the pharmacist there in Brimfield. They have 4 kids, Brody, Graham, Olin, and baby Millie. Denise's boys are Cody Choate and Alva McNutt. Cody is a guard at a federal prison in Virginia, and Alva drives a truck for a company that rents out bulldozers, backhoes, excavators, generators, and big stuff like that. He lives in East Peoria with his wife and child. Becky was a stay-at-home mom for several years, and after a divorce, worked as an insurance actuary in Peoria. Then for Phil Price's Red and White in Wyoming, and later as a bookkeeper teller at the Wyoming Bank and Trust. And that's where I first laid eyes on her. And I can't say it was love at first sight, but I did notice that she was very nice and very attractive. I was opening a checking account because I had taken a job as the editor of the Wyoming Post-Herald, and that was November of 1980, and soon we learned Becky had been hired to sing with the country band at the famous Hub Ballroom in Edelstein. That was a big deal and required a front page story in the Post-Herald. On stage, she used her maiden name, Becky Sue Robb. Hub owner Ray Hanlon ran a big ad in the Post-Herald announcing her debut at the annual Wyoming Firemen's Ball, which was held at the Hub. That was in early January, as I recall. Becky was not the first country singer I had interviewed. The first was Loretta Lynn, and she was down to earth and really fun. Becky was also down to earth, but I gotta say she was kind of annoying. I couldn't get her to tell me who she sounded like or about her singing career goals. She wouldn't admit to plans for Nashville or appearing at the Grand Ole Opry. She just liked to sing, and everybody said she was good. I wrote the story, and it appeared before I'd heard her voice. And I should stop here to say that this was not, I learned not too long ago. She should have told me this at the time of the interview. This was not her first professional singing gig. That would have been at about age 10 when she carried the Kewanee Star Courier around town, and one of her customers was Buck Swords at the Buck Swords Tavern there on where the post office sits now. She would bring the paper in, and Buck would give her a nickel to sing a song. Remember what it was? Well, I'm guessing it was "How much is that doggy in the window?" It was a while ago. So I attended the Fireman's Ball because I had to do another story. For the first time, that's when I heard Becky singing. I was really floored. She was really special. A few weeks later, at my suggestion, we got together with a guitar and some songs I had written as part of the Bluegrass Opera of Detroit. Before we even started, she said she wanted to be really clear about something. This was just about music, nothing more. Well, that was a relief to me, since I had a divorce in my background as well. Neither of us was interested in romantic entanglements. 7 months later, we were married. And soon we'll celebrate our 45th anniversary. And I wasn't going to say this, but I will. And in all that time, we've never had an argument or a big fight like that. And I didn't want to say it because I know nobody believes that. So, but back to, as we started married life together, we prayed that we would find a way to make a living in Stark County and stay here, where we both grew up. Becky suggested we start a paper like she had enjoyed when she lived in Princeville. It was the advertiser and was mailed to everyone for free. That's how the Prairie Shopper started. It was her idea, and neither of us knew much about business. If we had, I suppose, we wouldn't have tried it at all. I had been a reporter and knew nothing about selling ads. Becky at least was a bookkeeper at the bank and a stickler for details. I was quite the opposite, and we're still pretty much opposite in many ways. So here we are, a year after Bill and Barb Winans were honored. Our families don't go back as far as the Winans, and we don't have a road named for us, but we've been around for a while. My dad, Lowell T. McKirgan, the first of the Lowells, grew up on the banks of Walnut Creek, south of Lafayette. He was a 1929 graduate of LHS and still holds the county record for the javelin throw. Nobody challenges him anymore. He's still, those of a certain age remember him as the county's game warden. Many called him Tuffy, a name he said he earned growing up with 4 sisters. There are other explanations. The McKirgan family roots go back to Northern Ireland. A great-grandfather was brought here to manage a farm at Magnolia to breed Shetland ponies. The first of my family arrived in 1865 as the Civil War was ending. They recalled riding on a train from New York with Union soldiers. My mother was Ina Anderson McKirgan. She was the 2003 badge honorees, and I'm wearing her badge today. The Andersons arrived from Sweden in the 1860s and settled in the Magnolia Varna area. Mom was the oldest in the family and spoke Swedish fluently, and joined many conversations in later years with the Swedes at Bishop Hill in Galva. We went to church at the Lutheran church in Galva, and as a kid there were still many Swede talkers up there. Mom and Grandma Bertha would revert to Swedish when they wanted to discuss something too sensitive for my tender ears. I tried to learn the language, but all I got was "Tack så mycket." Thank you very much. Like Becky, I grew up here in Stark County, the second of the Lowells. Mom and Dad lived in basically a hut south of town at the time of my birth in 1940. For lack of medical facilities, few were actually born in Lafayette. My late brother John, for example, was born at Kewanee Public Hospital in 1948. My late sister Betty arrived at Grandma's Anderson's house in Magnolia in 1936. and I was born in the same house 4 years later. Looking back at my youth in Lafayette, I wouldn't change a thing. Around 1950, we had 2 grocery stores, a fireproof hotel, 2 restaurants, a lumber yard, a grain elevator, 2 gas stations, a library, a good library, trains pulled by steam engines passing through morning and evening on the Rock Island to Peoria line. There were free shows on summer Friday nights, and through the 40s, a spectacular fair just west of town. We had our own school, kindergarten through high school. I started on the first floor and graduated from the second. Simple as that. We had lots of interesting characters in those days, lots. And we still have a few. I loved my time as a kid in Lafayette, but by the time I finished high school, I could not wait to get out of that boring little town. I remember nothing of my graduation, but clearly recall driving in my Model A Ford, like the one Ben Parker drove that the next morning, headed for Fox Lake, where a construction job awaited me. It paid $2 an hour, twice what I could earn at the Lafayette Home Nursery. And that experience is typical of what we've all known here in Stark County. Generous people willing to help. My benefactors were Grant and Ella Miller. He was a carpenter, and she had been my 19-year-old 4th grade teacher. They became close friends with my mom and dad before moving close to Chicago, where construction was booming and teachers earned more money. I lived with them, ate at their table, and only came to appreciate their great sacrifice many years later. During the summer, I could save about $600, and that, together with a scholarship, was enough to get me through a year at Illinois, where I graduated in 1962. To avoid the draft, I joined the Marines. Son Bill, the third of the Lowells, was born in 1965 at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and daughter Sue came along in 1967 while I was working in St. Louis for the Associated Press, and covered Cardinals games when the regular sports writer was off. I was there in the brand new Busch Stadium when the Cardinals won the 1967 World Series. Months later, the AP moved me to Detroit to be the night editor there. I arrived in time to cover the 1968 World Series. I did post-game locker room interviews with the Cardinals because, I had just come from St. Louis and obviously was pals with all those players. I can remember sitting in the press box in Tiger Stadium, surrounded by real, authentic sports writers who knew what they were doing, and thinking, how did a kid from Lafayette wind up here? I think the psychologists call this the imposter syndrome. Years later, I had the same feeling mixed with awe and some fear, quite a bit of fear actually, as I sat with Jimmy Hoffa in his kitchen outside Detroit. I was a regional editor with U.S. News and World Report magazine by that time, and, well, that's another story. Another time I covered a meeting of Republicans in downtown Detroit. They were trying to figure out how to attract more black voters, and they called in an expert from Chicago to talk about that. From way back at the back of this huge auditorium, I heard a familiar voice and looked up, strained to see our own Jim Nolan standing up there. He was the main speaker. Again, that's another story. I liked Detroit, but made many 7-hour trips back to Stark County. I had and still have a copy of the Schellenberger history and consulted it frequently. I especially enjoyed the descriptions of the pre-settlement prairie landscapes. So in 1979, I did what I had vowed never to do. I returned to Stark County to be nearer my children, who lived with their mother in Springfield. Bill then came to live with us and is a graduate of Toulon Lafayette High School. He currently lives in Cheyenne, Wyoming with with his wife Rose Appenheimer McKirgan. Bill is a cancer survivor, miraculously cancer-free. More answered prayer. He couldn't be here today because of recent vascular surgery. It's unrelated to the cancer. Daughter Sue is here with us today. She lives in Kansas, where her husband Jim Fruth is a pastor at a Baptist church in Lenexa. Two of their kids live close by, and the oldest, Sam, lives near Fort Worth, Texas. He's an engineer and has something to do with F-35 airplanes. Granddaughter Sarah Wheeler and her husband Corbin work for competing engineering firms in the Kansas City area. Grandson Michael Fruth is a registered nurse. He and wife Caitlin, also a nurse, work in the same hospital in Olathe. They're going to be buying their next home soon, and Sue came in a truck, so I'm sending a lawnmower back with her home. It's only 10 years old. Becky and I were married in 1981, and within a month launched the Prairie Shopper from our living room. We were warmly welcomed in all corners of Stark County. As I stated, we really didn't know what we were doing. A discouraging word early on would have turned us away. Instead, we were greatly blessed. I had to learn to sell advertising, and again, an early failure could have doomed our venture. One of the first efforts was with Gene Gill. I had known Gene a little from high school athletic days. We talked at the counter at Gill Grain in Bradford, and he listened closely as I explained what we were trying. We had printed a 4-page sample of the shopper to show what we had in mind. Gene, he's a kind of a quiet guy if any of you know him. He thumbed through the paper and without a word turned and walked back to his office. I was really scared. I thought, this is it. But he returned and pointed to a certain ad in the sample paper and said, "This one 4 times." And he handed me a check for $32, adding, "You'll be needing this." I could have kissed him, but I did not kiss him. Then we got started with much help. The first issue was mailed that fall, and with mailing labels printed at the State Bank of Toulon, thanks to Jerry Staple and others who helped us figure this out. The next morning, the phone rang. It was Mary Sywell, who was known as the mayor of Wadi Petra. She pointed out that I had spelled the name of her town incorrectly as I explained what the new paper was all about and where it was going. The next week, she's kind of like Connie, you don't argue with her too much. The next week, I corrected my mistake, and that's how my weekly column got started. And I kept on correcting errors then for some 30 years. Through the years, we had many capable employees. The first outside the family was Ruth Hollis. Can't say enough to thank you, Ruth. Then came Pam Wolf, who was also magnificent and has managed this recent transition from the Prairie Shopper to the Prairie News and now to the Henry Stark Voice, which is led by some very capable people. We are blessed to have a paper at all, in my opinion. These are tough times for printed newspapers. We wish them well. I spent a lot of my time talking about our days with the Prairie Shopper. It's what allowed us to stay home. Again, answered prayer. Over time, the paper seemed to take on a personality of its own. It was almost like we had just become caretakers of this community-owned thing. It's hard to explain. People were very protective. Becky and I have probably attended more parades, pancake breakfasts, hog roasts, beauty pageants, talent shows, and soup suppers than anyone else within earshot. In Bradford, I was allowed to sit on the reviewing stand next to the Labor Day parade announcer. We took pictures and printed them in our Prairie Times newspaper, which was quote-unquote retired in 2001, I think it was. Becky was an excellent photographer. Me, not so much. The point of all of this is to illustrate the great strength of Stark County and the reason Becky and I wanted to stay here. To better understand, just let me read some of the names that many of you will recognize as previous badge honorees. Percy Schellenberger, the history. Adam Ham, another road. Adam Fell, Robert Webster, Glenn Beal, Anthony Loudenberg, William Haggerty, William Lehman, Harvey Price, Gar Ingalls, another Lafayette boy, Glenn Addis, Bert Ellsraw, Dr. John Reel, Agnes Cole, Lily Beal, Eldon and Garna Porter, the famous Merritt Heaton, Jerry and Audrey Staple, Ben and Florence Parker, Isel Carroll, Ruth Fusner, Harold McMillan, Dorothy Schmidt, Carolyn Wallace, and Ron Wallace. Not the same year. Newt Wilkinson, John Cover, William O. Turnbull, David and Nancy Wilson, Bob and Nancy Rennick, Ed Fusner, Don and Bonnie Schmidt, Fred Sams, Henrietta Silliman, Minot Silliman, twice, 1919 and 1958. How'd that happen? We are humbled to be considered worthy enough to have our names added to such a list. I think there's a common thread as you consider those names. Warm-hearted folks, typical of our county, people who smiled a lot and loved to laugh, even at themselves. Ed Fusner comes to mind as I say that. We're in a good place here. Why did I ever want to leave? I'll stop here as we look ahead to today's worship service. I don't know what the preacher's got in mind for us, but this we know. God hears prayers and God answers prayers. Again, we are so honored. As my mom would say, Taksamika. Thank you very much.